Picture a country holding its breath at the exact same second, 7,000 islands stretched across the Pacific, and somehow all of them looking the same direction at once, because on the other side of the planet, in a city most of them will never visit, on a lawn most of them have never touched, a 21-year-old from Quezon City is about to walk out onto a tennis court and try to do something no Filipino has ever done before, and that is the story we're getting into today, because what happened this week at Wimbledon isn't just a good result on a scoreboard. It's the kind of moment a country waits generations for and doesn't always get. Her name is Alex Eala, and if you don't follow tennis closely, that name might still be new to you, but it won't stay that way for long. Tuesday the 30th of June 2026, at the All England Club in southwest London, Eala took to court 12 as the 29th seed, and just that sentence, the seeding, is where this story actually starts, because before this year, no player from the Philippines, man or woman, had ever been seeded at a Grand Slam. Not once. Not close. So when the draw sheet went up with her name printed in that seeded slot, it wasn't decoration, it was history sitting there in plain black type before a single ball had even been struck. To understand how strange and how fast this is, you have to go back and look at what the bar used to be. For decades, the highest-ranked Filipina in the sport's history was a player named Maricris Fernandez-Gentz, who reached a career high of 284th in the world back in the 90s, and that number sat there for a generation, untouched, treated almost like a ceiling nobody expected to see broken. Eala didn't just break it, she lapped it. She's currently sitting in the world's top 30, and the gap between 284 and 30 isn't just a gap, it's basically an entire alternate universe of tennis, a distance that separates a solid regional pro from a player who shows up on Grand Slam seeding sheets and makes broadcasters build entire segments around her. And she didn't get there by accident or by riding a soft draw. She got there by beating people who are supposed to beat her. Let's rewind further, because the roots of this run go back much earlier than this grass season. Eala grew up in Quezon City, started hitting a ball around age 4, and by the time she was 12 she'd already left home to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, which if you know anything about tennis development tells you everything about how seriously her talent was being taken even as a child. She rose through the junior ranks fast, climbing as high as world number 2 among juniors, and in 2022 she won the US Open girls singles title, becoming the first Filipino to ever capture a junior Grand Slam crown. That's usually where a story like this could have quietly plateaued, because junior success doesn't always translate. Plenty of brilliant 15-year-olds disappear into obscurity by 22. Eala didn't disappear. If anything, she sped up. The real breakout came in the spring of 2025 at the Miami Open, where she arrived on a wild card ranked way outside the top 100 and proceeded to do something borderline absurd. She beat 3 different Grand Slam champions back-to-back-to-back, Yelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, and Iga Swiatek, all inside the same tournament, without dropping a set against any of them. That run alone would have been enough to make her a story in most tennis-loving countries. But in the Philippines, a nation where basketball and boxing have always eaten up almost all of the sporting oxygen, it did something different. It introduced an entire population to a sport many of them had never really watched before. A few months later she kept adding to the ledger, becoming the first Filipina to ever win a Grand Slam main draw match in the Open era, clawing back from a set down against Denmark's Clara Tauson at the US Open in a match that had no business going her way until suddenly it did. By the end of that season she'd cracked the world's top 50, another first, and the trajectory only got steeper from there. Which brings us to this year's grass swing, because if Miami was the introduction, June of 2026 is where the story stopped being a nice narrative and started being undeniable. Grass is not a surface Eala grew up mastering. It rewards a completely different set of instincts than the hard courts and clay she cut her teeth on, low bounces, quick points, footwork that has to adjust on the fly, and yet somehow this is the surface where everything clicked hardest for her this season. Early in June she won the Birmingham Open, a WTA 125 event, taking the title in a final that went the distance against Nikola Bartunkova, and it marked her first ever grass court trophy. That alone would have been a nice line on the resume. Instead it turned out to be the warm-up act. The very next week she landed in the draw at the Berlin Open, a much bigger WTA 500 event stacked with ranked players, and what she did there is the kind of stretch commentators wait years to describe. First round, she took down Donna Vekic, who had just won the title at Queen's Club days earlier. Next round, she drew Elena Rybakina, the world number 2 and a former Wimbledon champion in her own right, and beat her in straight sets, a result the WTA itself flagged as a career-defining win. Quarterfinals, she got past Alina Svitolina, another former top 10 player with deep Grand Slam pedigree. 3 matches, 3 genuinely elite scalps, all in the span of a few days. On a surface she was still essentially learning. The run finally ended in the semi-final against Linda Noskova, who went on to win the whole tournament, so even the loss came against the eventual champion, which softens the sting considerably. Step back and actually sit with that stretch for a second, because it's easy to let a list of names blur together. But what happened? There was a 21-year-old with barely any grass court resume walking into one of the tour's deeper draws and beating a Queen's Club champion, a former Wimbledon finalist, and a former top 10 mainstay, essentially rewriting overnight what people thought her ceiling on this surface actually was. That result vaulted her from outside the top 35 all the way up to world number 30 by the June 22 rankings update, which happened to be exactly the cutoff date Wimbledon uses to lock in its seedings. 5 spots, 1 tournament, and suddenly she's not just in the draw, she's seeded, guaranteed to avoid the very top players until at least the 3rd round, a cushion no Filipino player has ever had at a major before. Before Wimbledon even began, there was one more quiet chapter worth pausing on. In her final warm-up event at Bad Homburg, Eala actually lost in the first round of singles to Belgium's Elise Mertens, a reminder that grass mastery still isn't fully automatic for her and that this whole surface is still relatively new territory. But in doubles at that same event, she partnered with Venus Williams, a 5-time Wimbledon singles champion, and the two of them pushed all the way to the quarterfinals together. Think about what that actually means. Venus Williams doesn't share a doubles court with just anyone, and she doesn't do it as a courtesy appearance either. She's a competitor who plays to win, and the fact that she chose to pair up with Eala right before Wimbledon reads less like a coincidence and more like a quiet form of validation from someone whose name is literally engraved on trophies at the tournament they were both about to walk into. So by the time Tuesday actually arrived, the story already had weight attached to it before a single point had been played, and that's the part worth sitting with, because the pressure on Eala this week isn't really about her opponent, it's about everything else. It's about being the first, about representing a country of over 100 million people who are mostly discovering this sport through her, about carrying a kind of scrutiny that most 21-year-olds never have to think about, let alone manage on a tennis court in front of a global television audience. Her first-round opponent was Renata Zarazua of Mexico, ranked 75th in the world, a gritty veteran who happens to also be Eala's former doubles partner from last year's French Open, which added its own strange layer of familiarity to the matchup. On paper this wasn't a trap game exactly, but grass can be unpredictable. First rounds at majors have swallowed higher seeds before, and there was every reason to expect nerves given everything riding on the outcome. None of that showed up on the court. Eala came out and dismantled Zarazua in straight sets, 6-1, 6-2, wrapping the match in a little over an hour, breaking serve repeatedly and never really allowing her opponent any room to settle into a rhythm. It was, by any measure, the most dominant version of her Wimbledon debut she could have asked for, and it also happened to be her first ever match win at the tournament, since last year's maiden appearance had ended in the first round against then-defending champion Barbara Krejcikova. So this wasn't just a win, it was a correction, a statement that last year's exit wasn't a ceiling, it was a growing pain. And here's where the story took an unexpected twist, because for weeks leading up to Wimbledon, a lot of the buzz around Eala's side of the draw centered on a potential second-round meeting with Serena Williams, who had come out of retirement and been handed the tournament's final wildcard spot, a storyline practically engineered for headlines, the 23-time Grand Slam champion against the sport's fastest-rising new face. It never happened. Williams, playing her first singles match since a third-round exit at the US Open back in 2022, ran into Australia's Maya Joint in the first round and lost in 3 sets, 6-3, 6-7, 6-3, ending her comeback before the dream matchup could ever materialize. So instead of Serena waiting in round 2, it's Joint, the very player who beat her, and the player who also happens to have gotten the better of Eala once before, at last year's Eastbourne tournament. It's a strange kind of poetic symmetry. The cinematic storyline got swapped out for a rawer, more competitive one, no ready-made headline, just a genuine tennis puzzle against someone who's already had her number on grass before. If Eala wanted center stage against a legend, the draw decided to hand her something arguably harder instead, a live rival with recent scar tissue between them, and how she responds to that will probably tell us more about where her game actually stands than a nostalgia match ever could have. Now, zoom out from the bracket for a second, because the story here isn't only about wins and losses, it's about what's happening in the stands and well beyond them. Reporting out of Wimbledon this week has described a scene that follows Eala pretty much everywhere she goes on tour now, and it's less like typical tennis fandom and more like something borrowed from football culture, waves of Filipino flags, chants in Tagalog rolling through the crowd, entire sections that seem to organize themselves around her matches regardless of what country she's actually playing in. It happened in Melbourne earlier this year, it happened again in Berlin, it happened in Birmingham, and now it's happening in London too, This traveling wall of support that shows up courtside no matter the continent, built from nurses and engineers and students and overseas workers who found a shared reason to gather around a television or a stadium seat. Commentators who've spent decades around the sport have started describing what she's doing less as a hot streak and more as the arrival of an entirely new audience for tennis, a fan base that didn't previously exist and is now being built in real time around one player's results. That's a heavier kind of impact than a ranking number can really capture, because rankings measure a career, but audiences measure a movement, and what's forming around Eala looks a lot more like the second one. It's also worth remembering that she isn't stepping into a completely empty history, even if it sometimes gets framed that way. The Philippines actually has a long, mostly forgotten tennis lineage that stretches back to the 1950s, when Felicissimo Ampon and Raimundo Darro were reaching the later rounds of Roland Garros and Wimbledon in an era when very few players from anywhere in Asia made it that far. There's Cecil Mamiat, who cracked the world's top 100 playing under the Philippine flag, and Treat Huey, a double specialist who reached a Wimbledon semifinal and climbed into the world's top 20 in that discipline. None of them, though, ever broke into the WTA or ATP's true elite tier in singles. None of them ever walked out at a major as a seeded player, and that's the specific wall Eala is the first to actually knock down. So she's not inventing Philippine tennis history from nothing. She's the one finally cashing in a legacy that's been building quietly for 70 years without ever quite reaching the top shelf. In interviews this week, Eala has talked openly about the weight of all this attention, acknowledging that pressure is simply part of life on tour now, but framing it as something she gets to decide how much power to give, rather than something that automatically controls her. It's a mature answer for someone this young, and honestly it's the only sane way to survive a spotlight this size at 21, because if she let herself absorb the full scale of what 113 million people watching actually feels like, it would be very easy to freeze. Instead, she's choosing to compartmentalize it, focusing on the next ball, the next point, the next unglamorous opponent standing across the net, which is exactly what got her through Zarazua in straight sets and exactly what she'll need against Joint. None of this comes with a guarantee, and it's worth being honest about that instead of just riding the hype. She's still relatively early in her relationship with grass as a surface. This is only her second Wimbledon main draw appearance, and she's lost twice this season already to Iva Jovic, a rising American who has clearly figured out something in her game that others haven't yet solved. Berlin ended in a semi-final loss. Bad Homburg ended in a first-round exit in singles. So the picture isn't some flawless unbroken streak. It's a talented young player still working out the exact edges of what she's capable of on a surface that rewards different instincts than the one she grew up on. But that's actually what makes this moment interesting rather than just impressive, because the story isn't finished. There's real uncertainty baked into what happens next, and that tension between how far she's already come and how much is still unproven is exactly what's going to keep people watching her matches for the rest of this tournament and probably for years after it. What's certain is that the ceiling for Philippine tennis has been rewritten permanently, regardless of how the rest of this particular fortnight plays out. The seeding already happened. The history-making win already happened. The image of Court 12 packed with Filipino flags already happened. Whatever comes next against Maya Joint, win or lose, doesn't undo any of that. It only adds another chapter to it. And maybe that's the most interesting part of watching an athlete like this at this exact stage of a career. You're not just watching someone chase a trophy, you're watching someone build the very foundation that didn't exist before her, laying it down match by match, city by city, so that the next kid in Manila who picks up a racket grows up in a country that already knows what's possible. Alex Eala didn't inherit that belief. She's the one creating it, live, on grass, in real time, and whatever happens on Court 12 next, the door she's already kicked open isn't closing anytime soon.